Just decide to make an upgrade. Welcome back to another episode of the Upgrade in My Classroom podcast. My name is Kevin McKellar, the host, and this is the show where we teach proactive mental health and personal development strategies for teens. So teachers and education professionals, administrators, guidance counselors can come listen to the show and learn a few things and go upgrade their classroom. Go bring different types of social and emotional exercises, different resilience exercises, different ways to teach better decision making to their students and their communities. Today I have on a really, really special guest. His name is Scott Wisniewski, and he is the assistant principal over in Wayne Valley High School over in New Jersey. And I found him online because he won the assistant principal that NASSP 2022 award. So that's the National Association for Secondary School Principals. So he knows his stuff. And I wanted to have him on to really dig into what he is doing from a building level when it comes to mental health. And I was blown away, especially at the very tail end of the podcast. He breaks down some of the stuff that he is doing and implementing in his building, and I am really, really impressed. We also touched a little bit on some ways to work through discipline. From the assistant principal role, you find yourselves a lot of times doing disciplinary types of activities. And we dig into that quite a bit when it comes to how we approach them and how do we deal with the mental health aspect of this discipline and the action that student did or did not do, whatever it may be. And we really kind of unpack that quite a bit from every angle, from getting parents involved and everything. So with that being said, let's jump into my conversation with Mr. Scott Wisniewski. So, Mr. Wisniewski, thank you for joining us on the show today. How are you?
Very good, very good.
How'd I do on the name?
Oh, you did perfect. Great job.
Oh, look at that. I'm glad we practiced it about 50 times prior. So moving forward, I'm going to call you Scott. Thank you so much for jumping on the show. What I'd like to do is give you a minute or two to kind of introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us kind of who you are and what district you work at and what you do there.
I'm an assistant principal at Wayne Valley High School. I've been in my position at Wayne for 7 years. Part of that responsibility includes overseeing the counseling and mathematics department. Over the last couple of years, I've been trying to just do a lot of initiatives just to help students in any ways. I've been fortunate, just recently been named the NJPSA Assistant Principal of the Year for 2022. And certainly something that could not have been done without the staff and students here at Valley and the leadership that I am able to learn from our principal here, Mr. Pazuski.
That's awesome. So that's actually how I found you. I was looking through. So in our the social media world, we fall and stumble onto so many different pages, and we go down to so many different rabbit holes. And somehow I ended up on that page would have all the principals and assistant principals of the year, those awards. And I found you. I said, let me reach out. I mean, you're fairly close. I'm over in Long Island, New York. I'm in New Jersey. Let's chop it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about your perspective as an assistant principal from the mental health side. I've had my goal here on the show is to bring on a myriad of different guests. So whether that be teachers, whether that be other youth speakers and youth coaches, of course, principals and other administrators. So I think you might be actually the first assistant principal. And I think that's really important because those duties of an AP versus a principal are definitely different. So before we even jump into mental health, right? Yeah. Like talk to us a little bit about from your perspective, what are some of those differences? Like what does your day-to-day look like different than your principal?
Day to day for an assistant principal is funny because you could have a plan, and I had a plan this morning and did not reach that plan. And I know we had other days scheduled and, things sort of come up. So you have to be flexible. You can't say your schedule, this is what it is, and stay rigid to it. I think when you try to look at what an assistant principal does, ironically enough, I was just on a Instagram Live that NASSP did, which is the National Association for Secondary School Principals. and it was a National Assistant Principal Week, and that was one of our questions: is what does an assistant principal do? And it's interesting because every school district, every school has its own unique way of defining what that assistant principal role is. Like for us in Wayne, we are assistant principals, attendance and discipline, but we also have supervisory roles of core content areas. There's no supervisors in our district. My previous district, we were an assistant principal, attendance discipline, but they had supervisors for the STEM courses and the humanities courses. So really what I think, if you were to define it, if you fill in all the gaps, you're that middle management, you're balancing the goals and that comes from central office and the goals that come from the principal, and from the teacher's end, you're trying to help facilitate that. You're the teacher's first line when anything happens. You're there to help and assist. You're also the parent's first line. So a lot of times you're dealing with things that you didn't have a part in becoming a problem, and then now they're a problem, and now you're left with both sides and trying to mediate that. And it's so important that you balance both sides, because you want the parents to know that you're there to advocate for them and that you understand where they're coming from, but you also have teachers and kids that want the same thing. And sometimes you have two opposing forces and you try to find the middle ground. But I think our role is so important because it helps build those relationships, keeps that glue of the school together. But the relationships that we build from the students, teachers, and central office is so important to making sure that school finds success.
So let me unpack a little bit. When you have these two opposing forces, do you feel like sometimes at the end of the day, the issues are not necessarily really resolved, and the event has been resolved, whatever that may be, mm-hmm. and it could be many different types of events, but the event may be kind of like we've kind of wrapped up and figured out how to deal with it, but like the issue itself, the underlying issue, is not resolved. Do you often find that? And if you do, how do you deal with that emotionally from a job satisfaction perspective?
Well, I think, and that's where the relationships are important. You build out this equity, and at the end of the day, not everybody's going to agree with the final outcome. But that's where, when you look at practices like the restorative practices, so you understand if a kid does something wrong and it upsets the teacher, how do you get that relationship mended again? So you're working towards that resolution, that ultimately students need to be in classes to find success and to learn. And if there's a mend in that relationship or a bend in that relationship, what can you do as the administrator? What could you do as a school leader? Help build that back. Same with parents. You want them to trust you. And for them to trust you, there's going to be times where you're going to tell them things they don't want to hear, or they don't agree with, or they, for them may not feel resolved. But it's being clear with them that you are still advocating for their child. You are still on their side, that even if they did make this mistake, and kids will make mistakes, and that's okay, right? The goal is you don't make the same mistake twice, or you make it constantly, right? But if you make a mistake, it doesn't define that kid as who they are. It doesn't define that child as being a bad kid. It just means they made a mistake, and what can we do in the future to move forward? And that relationship isn't built on that one day that incident happens. You're building that constantly, seeing kids in the hallway, saying hi to them, talking to them, trying to find out how they're doing on a daily basis. When you talk to parents, showing empathy, your parents are calling, like, I have two daughters. I know you have a daughter. Like, it's your kid. So you are going to advocate for them, and you have to know that going in. And I always try to say that to parents. Like, they're like, I apologize if I'm taking up too much of your time, or if, saying all these things. I get it. You're there for your kid, and your child needs to know that you have their back. Again, we may not agree on everything, but I understand where your energy is coming from, because that's your child, and you've seen them, you know them better than I do. You've seen them grow up. You've been there for them on the ups and downs, and you see them when they're home. So if something happened at school where they're upset at home for it, and you're feeling that, I can understand why you're calling and reaching out. But we'll try to come to a resolution. And in some cases, it's in the middle. right? Some people did something that they shouldn't have on both sides, and we try to come to some resolution so we can move forward so students could find success and reach their potential.
So, two things I want to follow up with something you said about time, but I love to be realistic, and part when I work with kids and I do a keynote or something or breakout, whatever it is, I usually, there's a lot of stories in there from a lot of dumb decisions that I did when I was a kid. Big difference specifically. There's a lot of people that go through life and they kind of, they grow up a little bit and they become better versions of themselves or maybe worse versions of themselves. I'm one of those people who did a complete 180, right? In many respects. And I remember the only time I ever got in trouble with an assistant principal was I had a 95 Camaro for my first car, and it was nothing special, but like it was just enough where my stepdad was a mechanic, and he had to, so he got a deal on it. It just was like knows so many people in the industry. It was like, picked up this car, whatever, and it was nice, and he had to fix the exhaust on it, but he only had a dual exhaust laying around, so it had a little rumble to it. Like it was a cool car. Okay. It was snowing a little bit, had maybe a couple of inches on the ground, and it was a Camaro, so it had a rear-wheel drive. I mean, slipping and sliding was like an everyday thing for me in the winter, and I got really good at navigating like how to do that. And I was by myself. It was 6:45 in the morning or whatever it is, getting to school. And I just was in the parking lot. I was like, let me just, I wasn't even trying to, nobody was even there. And I just wanted to and just did like a little donut, just one little donut. And then I just went right into the parking lot, like not even fast, right?
Yeah.
And I thought nothing of it. It was just like, that's how I park my car. It's just some dumb, stupid thing, right? And first period rolls around. Then I, attention, Kevin McKellar, please report to the main office. And I'm like, well, I didn't even think I was in trouble. I was like,
yeah.
All right, well, I guess something. So I walked in, and I forgot his name. He was such a nice guy too. The one assistant principal. He always let me in on the. I'm going off on a tangent, but bear with me. He would always let me in give me the keys because I was doing a lot of theater lighting and sound in there, so I was getting to the lighting box. Anyway, he sits me down and he goes, "Hey, Kevin, I know you. You're a good kid. For the most part, like you're a really good kid. What the hell happened today? What did you do?" And like was so shocked. And, that I knew he was a really good principal because he knew me. He did know me. He knew the students. He took the time and energy to get to know each and every, kid. And he knew that primarily I was a decent kid. I mean, yeah, I did a lot of dumb things, but like, he knew that I didn't mean any harm. He's like, this is just like, he doesn't understand that that's dangerous. Like this is a child that needs to be taught this. And I'm not going to reprimand him like I'm just going to like a textbook. You're blah, blah, blah. Like he just was like, all right, listen. And he literally, I'll never forget this. He literally said, I got to do something. I got to just like take your parking pass away for a couple of weeks. He's like, I got to do something. Like he didn't want it either way. I tell you that stupid story because I think it's important because you strike me as somebody who really takes the time and energy to get to know each and every student and get to know their struggles, both on a academic and an emotional, mental situation. Now, going back to something you said when a parent may say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much of your time." When that happens, and sometimes maybe they are taking too much of your time, how hard is it for you to say to yourself and become mindful in the situation before you start today? Like that is maybe the most important part of your job. Does that always come as easy as is, or sometimes do you find yourself like, oh man, I got to, yeah, you are taking it. Like how often do you find yourself in that predicament?
I wouldn't say often, but I think when that happens, whether that's, a kid, you end up talking to a kid a little bit longer than you intended, whether you end up talking to a parent, teacher, whatever, it's all part of it. And the way I look at it as is like things like observations, things like the discipline letters we have to put together. I try to do that after school when there's nobody here. I want to be as present, and I could do a better job. I wish I could do a better job of getting out in the school more than what I do. But if I have that opportunity to sit and talk with a teacher, sit and talk with a kid or sit and talk with a parent, just I want to take that opportunity because that's the important time. So you have to know going into it, those are going to happen. And you can't say, well, listen, we got to cut this short because I need to go finish this, writing up this observation. Like there's plenty of times where, I'm sitting there watching shows with my girls at night and I'm typing up observations, typing up school stuff for school. I mean, it really, you find the time to do it. But when you have that opportunity with the kid in front of you or a parent in front of you or a teacher in front of you, you take that opportunity. You take the opportunity to hear where they're coming from. Because when you go to have that difficult conversation, they messed up pretty bad and they're going to be suspended. They know that, to use your words, it's not something you want to do. I don't wake up in the morning getting excited to suspend a kid. It doesn't feel good for me. I don't get any joy or enjoyment out of it or excitement out of it. It's, all right, this happened. What could we do? This is what the policy states. This is what you have to get. It's what it is. It was pretty bad, so we got to deal with it. But once we deal with it, all right, what's next? How are we going to mend this relationship? You come back to school, you need help for something, I'm right here to help you no matter what it is. And that's how you have to just keep going on, because you could approach that situation that you brought up as, and our principal talks about all the time. You can have a kid, you can determine how that conversation with that student is going to go in the first couple minutes of you talking to them. He took that approach with you, and that was one thing. He could have come in, slammed the door shut, said, what is wrong with you? How could you do this? How disrespectful is that? You're making a mess. How dangerous is you could have hurt somebody. And said basically the same thing, but with a different tone, different approach. It could have either been, just an easy conversation where the discipline's exactly the same, or where it turns into the shouting match between you and a student, which then potentially puts them in a bigger problem than what they started with. So it's all the approach. And it doesn't mean you take it light on them. It doesn't mean you're not going to discipline as they should. It doesn't mean you're not going to talk to them about the mistakes they made, but it's how you approach that. And if you approach it in a way, they're more apt to listen. Like if you start yelling at kids right off the bat, they're going to shut you out. Yeah. So, I mean, it's simple little things that when you look at it big picture, you're trying to avoid them making the same mistake again. And you hope that the conversation, you hope that the relationship you build helps so they're not making those same mistakes again.
That's awesome. Very well said. Like very well. This is not something that you just thought of. It's within your bones as an administrator. So really kudos to you. With that being said, I want to transition to with the fact that you are, as an AP, you are dealing with disciplinary acts and things like that. How much of do you find at your level, at the secondary level, like the disciplinary actions are coming from a place of simple lack of mindfulness versus a much deeper emotionally charged issue that this student is going through, and especially considering you are heading up the counseling department, like where is that? Like for me, that little stupid story, complete lack of mindfulness there, in that moment, I wasn't going through anything. It was just like, I just wasn't being aware of my responsibilities as a driver and an adult. Like what's that balance look like for you?
And I think, and I'll get to that, but I think one of the things coming out of COVID was the emotional maturity that got lost when kids didn't have the social interactions that school brings. Not all the learning that happens at school is quantified in grades. They learn how to interact socially. They learn what to do, what not to do. You know what I mean? Like these are things that happen during school, how you interact with peers, how to talk and interact with teachers. All these things happen. So when you think of those discipline things, I think every school would say the same thing. Discipline was on a little bit of an uptick when we came back with COVID, and even after the masks, and as the masks started to come off and get back to like traditional normal school. I don't like to say the word normal, but that traditional schooling sense again. I think that was, you still had some of those mistakes, some just, kids not growing up at the time, kids that were freshmen and sophomores having behaviors that you would typically see in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, but they didn't have those social years And that was because of the pandemic and things we
Hmm.
had to do. So it's taken a little bit of time. But I think you do see that. And I think where you mostly see more of the deeper rooted things are the ones that have the multiple offenses, things that,
Hmm.
you try to change the behaviors and things are happening and happening, whether it's cutting class constantly or, if they're using drugs and alcohol. There's more times than not a story behind it and a thing that a kid is dealing with that is difficult. And not to say that every kid going through something makes bad choices. We have kids that go to school every day, do their academics, show up, don't get in trouble. And when you hear about some of the things that happen in their lives outside of school, it's not good.
No.
So it's not, and I don't want to say every kid that has an adverse life at home is going to have, make bad decisions in school.
Right.
But it is certainly something where it does happen. And it's hard. It's hard to deal with it because I think when, as an administrator, and sometimes as an administrator, we know more about what's going on in the home life and a personal life of a student. And it's not always appropriate to share that fully with the teachers, and
Right.
sometimes it's hard for them to fully empathize or understand that things are happening. And that's why maybe they're not focusing as much as they should in class, or they're responding or acting out in the ways that they are. That energy is not necessarily directed at that teacher. It's just what's burning inside of them, and it's coming out that way. But the teacher perceives it as they're coming at them, but
Yeah.
without knowing, they have this stuff going on at home, and this is a trigger for them. So you're trying to navigate that road of sharing as much you can with the teachers while also respecting the confidentiality of the student and their family.
Now, it's with sharing information with teachers is interesting because they're in a way they are reporting to you. You are their boss. You're observing them. You're writing up professional observations. Like there's a lot of things that come along with that. Where, how have you navigated being as best of a boss as you can through through COVID, considering that teachers and now, I mean, we're expected to do the impossible. I mean, let's just face it. Like we were not ready to do that. What we needed to do. I mean, now obviously we're becoming as best we can virtually, but how are you able to coach them to keep their own perspective and keep their own right mindset about why they got into teaching and what they're able to do and how much of an impact they are making? Because that does sometimes, from a leadership perspective, fall on you and the other APs as well as the principal.
I think you empathize with the teachers the same way as you would ask them to empathize with their students. So you model that same approach that, if they're coming in a little bit late or their lesson plans in, and you just have the conversation where you're not coming down on them the same way. I think it's hypocritical as a school leader that you show all this empathy towards the students, and then, you have a teacher, little mistakes here and there, you jump all over them for it, and you have to take you have to have that similar approach, because then one side of that is not the true person of who you are.
Right.
And just like with the kids, if a teacher does something that requires something more than just a conversation, you got to do it. It's not something you appreciate or enjoy, but it's something, a conversation we have to have, because I still have a job and I still have a responsibility to make sure that the staff adheres to those policies. Now, during that time, COVID, like one of the other things I've done, I'm a Google certified trainer. So technology, that's actually my dissertation is not my dissertation, but my doctorate is going to be in educational leadership and in educational technology. So I tried to be a big help for the teachers to be able to manage that, going through, while also encouraging them to take risks. Take a chance. If you want to try this ed puzzle, go for it. If you want to, jump in and do this meet and, be able to write on a tablet here, and give it a shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, I'll tell them, you want me to sit in and I'll give you my honest, like, I'll give you feedback. We don't have to write it up. It doesn't have to be formal. But take the chance. I think I always saw technology as being a vital piece, as I transitioned from as a teacher, I always utilized technology, but technology in 2010 and 11 and 12
Oh,
was
I
much
remember.
different than it is now.
I remember.
I mean, even then, so even in my previous district in Dumont, we were doing professional development, teaching them all about Google and trying to get them going. So I tried to have that same approach here, was trying to help and assist anybody that, if they're going through, trying to figure out how to work this Ed puzzle or how to work Kahoot, what can I do to help? And just
Yeah.
encouraging them. But like I said, and if something were to be a fail and it not work, then you don't want to come down on somebody for that. You want to be able to be there as sort of that safety net and cushion and support them. And for me, it was whatever I can do to take something off your plate. There's certain things I just can't take off your plate, right? It's
Right.
just what it is. But if there's something else I can take off your plate, that if I can make your job easier, if it means me calling a parent for you, or you know what I mean, whatever it is, just tell me.
That's huge. Even the teachers that won't ever take you up on that, but they know that you're that type of leader, I think that's really, really important. I want to go back to something, because this has been a theme over the last, say, 20 episodes or so, where every guest that I've had on, we talk about COVID. Mm-hmm. Clearly a huge, huge issue regarding mental and emotional advancement, as well as mental health worldwide. I mean, worldwide, not just our kids. So we talk about these, say, for average on different districts throughout the country, we talk about these 2 years, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's the average, but maybe whatever it is. Let's just say 2 years, okay? The 2 years that was really turned upside down in education. So say it's a sixth grader and seventh grader, right? They're going through those 2 years at home virtually, okay? Mm-hmm. And now they come back as an eighth grader. So my first question is, will they be stunted from a mental and emotional perspective for their entirety of their high school career, if not their life? Or is that something that they will exponentially catch up to just simply by being back in school? That's number one. And then a follow-up to that is, will the other students that were, say, a first and second grader, will that be the same for them? Like, what are you finding? If you have, I mean, that's a huge question, but what do you think? How about that?
I would say what those 2 years did was maybe highlight or magnify a problem or an issue that might have been underlying had school not been thrown that way. That just brought it more to the forefront. I think every individual case you would look at as different. I don't think, like I said, I don't think you could generalize that and to say all these kids or these types of kids would be like this or like that. A lot of it goes to what the experience was like at home, what the experience was like. And you take a town like Wayne, that's a different experience than maybe in an urban city. It's just different. So it's hard to say that in terms of how they'll progress. And I could even say that as a parent. My daughter was kindergarten when we finished, when 2020, right? So she went kindergarten, then first grade, then second, you know what I mean? So you talk about those developmental years. I think it hurt her a little bit,
sure.
But she's got the time to try to pick it up and catch up. And I think it just highlighted something that we needed to address anyway. And I think and even seeing my two kids, how they reacted, at that time, now that one's in fifth and one's in third, it's tough. And we're educators. My wife is a principal, an elementary school principal. So we know what they're doing. We know what they're talking about. And I think it still was tough. And I just think about some of those circumstances where maybe kids didn't have someone right there helping them. How difficult that situation, those circumstances could have been. So how this sort of progresses is, I think, really up to how the schools address it to the best of their abilities. But I think it all goes down to the individual person. Everybody had their own unique experience on how they dealt with COVID. Some of it more negative than others, whether they experienced loss or grief or their parents lost, like, their jobs or a source of income wasn't there, what impact that had on a particular student. Or in some cases, school is release for kids. Going to school is one of the best parts of their day. In
Mm-hmm.
some cases, in some schools, that's where their meals come from. And then when you took that away, it obviously threw everything off. Um, in terms of trying to, how do we move forward, I think you address the mental health the best you can. And I think over time, you hope, obviously this doesn't happen again, but I think over time, you hope that you can do your best to catch the kids up to the best of their ability. Because at some point, you can't keep using the 2 years as a reason.
Right.
Like, it's just,
Right.
it happened. Yes, it happened, but it happened to everybody. And again, everybody's experience is different, but how do we move forward? So, like I said, we still see it at the high school where some of the behaviors are a little bit immature.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in time that becomes less and less.
Right.
And in time they not adhere, that's a bad word, but they assimilate to the culture that we're trying to build here.
Yeah, right, and understand it, and get the emotional intelligence to understand why that culture is important, and what our goal of trying to create happy and healthy, and successful individuals is, because that's what this is. Scott, I want to start wrapping up with just basically a question here, and I want to kind of see what you have done differently, coming off of the conversation around the pandemic. What have you done differently, especially considering your work with the counseling department, but your just in general within the building? What have you done differently when it comes to implementing mental health practices in the day-to-day and throughout the big picture of the school year? Obviously, I know one of them you had a guest of mine, Matt Bellis, come in and speak to the kids. So that's awesome. That's like a huge win right there. What else does that look like? What things are you guys doing?
So, I mean, fortunately for us, is even prior to COVID and talking to our counselors, we've always tried to focus on mental health. It's always been a thing. Again, just like we said earlier, all COVID did was highlight the need and the concern that schools had about students' mental health. And it brought it more to the forefront. And that was one thing during the pandemic, the kids' mental health. They need to be back in school for their mental health. I could say we've always tried to address the mental health. So going back, we've been doing a wellness fair for the last 6 years. Every year, once a year, we have this big wellness fair. We have outside organizations come in. We have students create booths, and their mission and their intent is, what do you think your peers need? What do you think you need? And these kids look up topics from the importance of sleep, the importance of meditation, all these awesome topics, but they take it in a way that relates to them. We have outside organizations about mental health and drug and alcohol use. They all come in. We have this big set of this big booth, all these tables. This year we had about 35 booths all set up in the gym, and every kid goes in during phys ed. They have to go to 10 different locations or 15 different locations as their attendance, and that's one day that they can really sit and talk about their mental health. Within that, one of the people we brought in, her name was Carrie Bacall. She has her own mindfulness program that she runs. So about 5 years ago, we started bringing her in because we were seeing discipline with our freshmen as the year was going on. So we brought that in, and now our freshmen do a 9-part series on mindfulness that happens throughout the year. So those are just two things that we started with, that all those were in place before this.
Wow.
We've done our third-party compliments, where we collect anonymous compliments from students and staff and everybody within our school community and distribute them anonymously. We've handed out anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 compliments on a given year. So again, you're trying to build people up. We haven't done it this year, but we would have like morning greeters. So kids would make these signs, and this is a different one of our student groups. They'd make signs as kids walk in at 7:20 and just say, "Hope you have a great day. You're going to do awesome." You try to do those things, and so you're talking about that. Now, coming out of COVID, we were able to jump into really two things that I think have been tremendously helpful. One, we started doing teen mental health first aid training. So we were able to get the last 2 years through a grant through the National Council of Mental Wellbeing. We've gotten our entire junior class trained in teen mental health as teen mental health first aid responders. And essentially what that does is, kids are more likely to go to a peer that's in crisis. So what we wanted to do was prepare the peer for how to have that conversation. We're not creating psychologists, therapists, or anything like that. But if a friend comes to you in crisis, what do you do? Because it's scary. You're a 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid, and one of your friends says, "I'm thinking about killing myself."
Right.
What do you do? Or I'm really down, and you notice behavior changes. So they have this program we go through during the junior year, and at the end of it, we get all 300 of our 300 kids in our junior class. They walk out with certifications that they're now teen mental health first aid responders, which is a fantastic thing. And this year, and our counselors do the training. So 4 of our counselors go into all the different sections, and they do a phenomenal job. And it's a total ask from them. It's not easy, so it's the conversations we have, and I appreciate them so much for this. We always advocate as a counseling department how important mental health is. This is an opportunity for them to actually go in and do it. So if they were to say, like, we don't have the time for that, or, it takes too much. Now you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. Either either it's an issue or it's not. So it just validates them when they talk about why mental health is an issue and what they need to do. We're able to now say our counselors go out of their way to go and to do this instruction. And it's 6 45-minute sessions. So these counselors, between the 4 of them, have 3 and 4 periods that they go in. So you're talking 18 hours of instruction in front of the kids on teen mental health first aid, which is a lot of time while we're asking them to also manage the whole rest of their caseload, their parents calling, student issues, 504 meetings, IEP meetings, all of that. But that's why to me, that's what validates it, because it shows that it matters to them. And for me as the leader, obviously I'm a math person by trade. I was certified this year as a youth mental health first aid instructor. So now I could help train myself, and one of our counselors are actually going to start training our teachers and staff on, if a kid comes to them, what do they do? Similar set of, criteria. We're going to offer that training to our staff, and then the district. So we're a district. Wayne services about 8,000 kids. We have 14 schools, 2 high schools that are 1,200 kids apiece. We're going to be able to offer this training throughout the district and then also to our community. So this has been a great initiative. I mean, there's been reports. I know other schools got into the grant. I know Ramsey High School just had, I think USA Today or the Washington Post did a story on their teen mental health first aid program. This is starting to gain traction in terms of a benefit and a proactive approach to addressing teen mental health and to addressing mental health within our kids. Again, it just gives them an action plan. What are you looking for? What are some of the signs and symptoms that you would see someone who's suffering from anxiety or depression? How do you go about asking how they are? How do you go about, starting that conversation? And probably the most important thing that all of us should do is how to listen non-judgmentally. It's so hard. Everybody, and you talk about this all the time, but it's like everybody wants to listen to respond. You should listen to understand. And that's a hard concept for people. Everybody thinks that they need to say something to validate what the other person's saying, but sometimes just agreeing and just supporting them and just saying you're there, how to then listen and then respond in an appropriate way. And probably the most important thing is, if you're not sure what to do, where to find a trusted adult, when to contact a trusted adult, and balancing that friendship as being still important, because you don't want to ruin, for the kid, they don't want to ruin that friendship because you went and going told that something happened. But having that conversation, listen, I'm concerned about you. I think we need to tell somebody. I think can we do this together? Can we go talk to someone together? I'll be right there with you. It's just giving them more of a game plan that if a peer comes to them, they know what to do. And now we're training our staff. And what this is also doing, it's opening up the conversation about mental health. You're talking about different mental health concerns and how we balance, and what are signs and symptoms to look for, that as an adult, if I'm a math teacher, English teacher, social studies teacher, you may not have this as your background, but you
Right.
get a better understanding. You could better identify maybe some things that are happening that you could now say, let me go to the counselor and talk to the counselor because I'm alarmed by this. Or if I want to have the conversation with the mom, again, you're not diagnosing anybody. We're not training people to be therapists.
Right.
What we are is just looking for certain things that maybe you might have overlooked in the past that you now have a better conversation. But what this also does, and I think this is more of like this underlying part to this whole process, is you're breaking the stigma of mental health. It's becoming more part of the conversation rather than something that you're hiding behind or something that's stigmatized so much. And it's so stigmatized in society. It's everything is mental health. It's everybody blames every problem on mental health, and there's a part to that, right? I mean, there are mental health issues that people go through, but there's a lot of people that have mental health concerns that you would absolutely never know about. You would never know that the struggles that they deal with, when they leave your classroom or leave school or go home. You don't know what that life looks like for them, and you don't know what it takes some people just to get up in the morning. And I guess the facade that people put on all day, to the point where when they go home, they're just absolutely exhausted because they've been putting on this show all day, because they don't want to be stigmatized as having anxiety or having depression and not being able to manage it. Everybody has, and I think everybody has anxiety. Everybody has moments of where they're sad and depressed. But I think when you try to define this, it's your inability to navigate it or manage it as well as other people, where your highs and lows, you stay down longer than other people. It's just harder to manage for some people. And I think doing this program and then now being able to talk to our students and staff about it, I think it helps make that more of a real conversation.
That is, I am so glad I asked you that one last question. I am so many emotions. I'm so happy. I'm so impressed. I'm so thrilled to hear that you are completely taking massive action to help. It's really incredible. That's amazing. I'm sorry if I cut you off there.
No.
Yeah.
And I said the other thing is our district, and thankful for our district, we've partnered with Tri-County Behavioral Health, and we offer counseling in school for students with an outside counselor.
Wow.
So it's providing that additional support. And one thing that we've been able to do this year is offer like a 6-part webinar series for parents through Tri-County, and they're going over how to have a conversation with your kids, how to recognize depression and anxiety in your child, what to do, how to approach that conversation. It's the 6-part series. We do it virtually. It is amazing, and we're able to record it. We put it on YouTube, and it's there for the parents and stuff. I mean, we're trying to do everything we can, and there's still more we obviously always could do. Not to say this is we're the benchmark of what to do, but there's always more you can do, and you hope to help everybody you can.
Yeah.
But I think we're doing everything we can, and we're trying to be as proactive as possible with addressing the needs and the issues that we're seeing in front of us.
So well said. So well done. Very, very impressed, Scott. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to learn a little bit more kind of what Wayne is really doing, and some of the details you were just told us, and check them out, like where would they go find out information about either yourself or the district?
I mean, you can, obviously, we're all on social media. We're all on our websites.
Yep.
But certainly if there's any educators out there that want to learn more about some of the programs we talked about, some of the things that I talked about, I'm always open. We're actually, I presented a couple weeks ago for NJPSA on our third-party compliments program. I'm going to be presenting on May 1st, along with our student assistance counselor, on how we do our wellness fair every year. So, I mean, these are just other opportunities to be able to get out and hear about how we sort of set all this up. And again, the wellness fair, our student assistance counselor does a phenomenal job. She is amazing. She is worth her weight in gold in terms of how she does. And I learned so much from her as, again, as a math person trying to gain a better understanding of the counseling field and of the mental health aspect of it. I sometimes sit in awe listening to her talk to parents and how she navigates those conversations. So she's amazing. We're going to be presenting together, but certainly I'm on Twitter. So certainly if people want to follow me, just come find me. I'd be happy to share. And that's part of education. A lot of the programs I talked about, we got from other people. We just happened to bring them in and make them fit our school. And like I said, all these things I think just help that conversation and break the stigma about mental health, which is so important in the times that we're in right now.
Incredible. Scott, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Awesome. Appreciate everything. Thank you.
So that's it. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Scott today. I really thank him for coming on the show and making the time, because I don't know of a more busy role of somebody rather than administration in a school building. An incredibly busy schedule. So thank you so much for making the time. If you guys want to learn a little bit more about what the Wayne School District is actually doing, you head over to their website and kind of find out what they're doing when it comes to different exercises and activities in mental health within the building. And just once again, very, very impressed. If you like today's episode, then please let me know by leaving a rating and review. That would be tremendous. It would help me so much more becoming a better host, but it also help more people find the show as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week on the Upgrade My Classroom podcast.